Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm back with Joe. Joe, how are you doing?
I'm all right, Perch. How are you?
Well, I'm great because we're back talking to Jim Zub. Jim, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you guys? Things are going well?
Yeah, everything is good. I mean, I have to jump right in. The question on everybody's mind, Canadian Jim Zub, how has the Freedom Rally been? Have you been down there with the trucks?
You just dropped this on me. Perch. You lovable scam. I wouldn't know. I'm here in Toronto. We had a few days of honking idiots here in downtown Toronto, and then I just sort of, thankfully, it is all wrapped up now, and some version of freedom reigns, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. Yeah. It's same as it ever was. Up here in Canada, it's same as it ever was. We're doing our thing. So
we still can go to Tim Hortons. That's the important part.
Yeah, Alpha Flight saved the day or something. Yeah,
We're
good. We're nice.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, no, the big news for you is actually something different, something completely different. And I told this story kind of in another place, but I don't think you've heard it yet. So just in terms of timeline. So you reach out to me and you point me at the announcement, because I had been working hard. I hadn't seen anything, that you are bringing Thunderbolts back, which is incredible.
Yes, yeah, which is kind of was a surprise for me in terms of being able to dive in on this project. For people who may not know, I actually wrote Thunderbolts back 2016 to 2017. I wrote a 12-issue run, bringing the team back. They were led by Bucky Barnes at that time. I had most of the original lineup of the Thunderbolts, and we had a big blast of a time. It was my first in continuity Marvel superhero stuff. I got to do this kind of big, crazy lead in to Secret Empire that Nick Spencer was building at the time. And that made enough of an impression in the Avengers office that I would move on from there to Uncanny Avengers and then do the big Avengers events, No Surrender and No Road Home, which led to Champions and all these other kind of opportunities that have happened at Marvel. So like Thunderbolts was a really cool project, and I had a ton of fun doing it. But I had hoped to be able to pick up after Secret Empire and do the book again. And it's just, one of those ones that like the project that got away. And I was like, man, I love that concept. I love that team and their legacy and all these kinds of things. It would be fun. But there's that sense that when you've done a run on a book, you're probably not going to get a chance to do it again in any way, shape, or form. And then I was one of the editors who's always been in my corner here at Marvel is Tom Brevoort. I'd been talking to CB Cebulski about some other project stuff, and then he mentioned this idea of this team, that could spin out of Devil's Reign, the stuff that Chip's doing, in the Daredevil book and everything kind of related to it in New York City. And so we started to sort of fashion this new vision of the team. And the more it kind of went along, I was like, no, this feels like this is Thunderbolts. Like this is in opposition to give people some context. Mayor Wilson Fisk, the kingpin of crime, is the mayor of New York City. Right. He's got his own team that he calls the Thunderbolts, and they're these like criminals that are causing trouble. They've been deputized, and under the auspice of the law, they're causing all this havoc. And I don't want to spoil Chip's end to Devil's Reign, but
no, go ahead.
Yeah. Things will come to a conclusion in some way, shape, or form. And on the other side of that, there's the potential for kind of a new vision of the Thunderbolts or something kind of in opposition to that blatantly criminal sort of side of things.
Right.
Hawkeye's got a real legacy with the team. He was actually the second leader of the Thunderbolts back in Kurt Busiek's original run.
Way back in the
day. And Clint didn't currently have a book, and I really wanted to write him. So I was like, he's kind of a focal point for this story and the way it's all coming together. And then we fashioned a team around this identity of this kind of New York-based superhero team. And a bunch of different characters were kind of in the mix on that list. And we pulled together this crew that I think is really different and eclectic and fun. And they're representing this idea that, Tom and CB and I kind of came up with around like redeeming the sort of Thunderbolts name. So we've got, Hawkeye, Clint Barton in there. We've got Victor Alvarez, who's the young power man. Right. And he's been recommended for the team by Luke Cage. We've got Monica Rambeau, Spectrum. Or for me, like when I was growing up, she was Captain Marvel.
Well, yeah, I mean, a huge. Actually, we got go through the roster. We've got to talk about these characters a little bit. So,
America Chavez, and then we've got Persuasion, who back in the day was Purple Girl. She was on the Alpha Flight team in the late '80s. We've also got a couple new characters. One of them has been revealed already. He's this sort of cyber soldier character called Gutsen Glory, and then we've got another character who's sort of done in the style of almost like a Jack Kirby creature. And he's going to be showing up in issue 2 of Thunderbolts. So it's this fun, kind of funky team.
It's a very different lineup.
Yeah, it's a real odd one. And I know that when I was, posting about the announcement, a lot of excitement from Hawkeye fans and America Chavez fans and Monica and all these characters. And then some old school Thunderbolts people were like, I don't get it. Why don't you have the original lineup? Why don't you have, Atlas and Moonstone and all these kind of characters who are so beloved? And it's sort of like I've done that, and I had a ton of fun writing those characters, but I can't just drag those old plot lines back. Like, that's not my goal here. We're trying to do something really different, particularly with this miniseries, and vault the Thunderbolts, into something unexpected and fun. And then, if that goes well, I do, have plans for some of those original characters and some of those old kind of threads that we can pull on, but I need to sort of pivot and do something different, and that's kind of where I'm coming from with it.
So is this a case where it's a mini series and it's 5 issues or 6 issues?
Yeah,
5 issues. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it one of those things where somewhat, and I realize this wouldn't be your call to make, but is it like West Coast Avengers started as a limited series, got a lot of good attention, of course, became ongoing. You've got the ideas. So if that were to come to pass, you'd be ready to go.
That's exactly what I want. Yeah. My hope is that we're able to really come out of the gate strong, blow people away, and surprise them with some of the cool stuff we've got in the mix. And, it's always that tough thing. You're trying to make something that is a complete, sounds awkward to say, unit of entertainment, that you can read those 5 issues and they all work. But then you've got enough potential and plot lines, and you want to develop more or dig deeper into these characters and see, how they kind of flow. And, when I was pitching this, the way I kind of pitched it was, I said, this is almost, to me, it feels like Ted Lasso by way of the Avengers. Like, we want to have this kind of feel good sort of bit. There's a bit of a comical aspect of it. Sorry, you were going to say there.
No. That's a strange combo pitch. So we got to get into, like, what do you mean by that? Ted Lasso. Yeah. So, what do you mean by this?
When I watched Ted Lasso, have you guys watched the show?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I was shocked at how effective it was at setting up these characters and building a lot of warmth between them. But it didn't mean there wasn't drama, and it didn't mean that there wasn't conflict. Do you know what I mean? But there was this underlying sense of sort of feel good fun or like hopefulness that bubbled beneath the surface of all these interactions. And even when they put the characters through the ringer, and they really do on some of those episodes, there was this overall kind of hopeful sense of forward momentum. Like, we want to see these characters thrive, and we want them to be better than what they are. Do you know what I mean? And they're trying so hard. Okay. And that was sort of the attitude that I wanted to bring to this. Like, Clint has had, a real rocky kind of history, and he's had moments where he's been very effective. And he's had, I think that particularly the modern incarnation where you're talking about Fraction and stuff like that, where he's got a lot more difficulties and stuff like that. And, I grew up with him as the leader of the West Coast Avengers and all this kind of stuff. Like, he was never Steve Rogers level kind of leader, but he definitely had, qualities. There's a reason why he was given the ability to lead that team, in the West Coast and stuff like that. Or he's faced death and he's done all these really big epic things. And yet he's also had these kind of down and out moments or struggles. And I wanted to kind of play with that element of it. Like, he wants to capture that feeling back. He's trying to be the leader he's always wanted to be. He wants to be back at the head of a team. When our first issue opens, he's trying to get the West Coast Avengers back together. Like, he's in this kind of midlife crisis sort of, hey, that was one of those times when things were working in my life. Let's get the band back together. Wouldn't that be great? I'll call up my pals and we're going to do this thing. And it doesn't end up going that way. And a series of events happen that drag him into this potential where he can now lead this new team of Thunderbolts and stand for something and, push it in this direction. But it's not quite the opportunity he expects, and it's not going to come to him the way that he expects. And so there's a bit of that Ted Lasso, maybe he's not the best fit for the job, or maybe he's not, got his head in the game and he's got to figure himself out. And I'm really enjoying that element of the characterization. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but in terms of attitude and in terms of, I want readers to come away with these strong kind of feelings about the character interaction and about wanting them to push past their difficulties.
Yeah.
And then put them into conflict with each other. Yeah.
I'd love to expand a bit on Clint Barton as a character, because
sure.
You're talking about him going through this midlife crisis, and it feels like he's a character who has a somewhat of a fan base at
sure.
Marvel. Like he's never cracked into that A tier, but
right.
It seems like pretty early on he's never quite kept his footing too long, because it's like,
right.
Oh, he's briefly a villain, then he's on the Avengers, then he's a Goliath for some reason, and then we'll put him at the West Coast Avengers. Oh, we'll have him go out with like Mockingbird, then we're going to break him up, and like we're going to kill him, we're going to bring him back. Like he always seems to be, I don't know if I'd say misused, but I would say like he seems to be a character that people briefly figure out what to do with him.
Right.
And then they lose steam with them, or they're
it's interesting
lost again very quickly.
That you describe it that way. To me, like he's in this interesting mid-tier of superheroes where he actually has a lot of swing, because he doesn't have to fit one absolute vision. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, so, Dan Slott's writing Peter Parker and he gives him that huge corporation, Parker Industries and all that stuff. And the fandom shakes their fist and they says, you can't do that. That's not Peter Parker, right? Because they've got this real, templated version of how Peter's supposed to be and where he's supposed to be in his life and all that kind of stuff. Right. But you can't have Peter be the loser forever, and you can't have him, any one paradigm. If you hold it too long, the fandom's like, I'm bored. Why don't you guys surprise me? The nice thing about these mid-tier characters, and I put, like Wanda Maximoff and the Vision and Pietro, like these mid-tier kind of Marvel characters, the great thing about them is that because they don't have a single vision of them, because they don't have a single templated, they must be this way, you've actually got more room to kind of swing them around. You've got room to kind of go, hey, they can grow, they can change. They don't have to be stuck in amber. Like I feel like some of the A tier, when you try and push them too far outside the bounds, the fandom can't deal with it. Whereas it's like, no, you can try this stuff. Why don't we, let's try something with Wonder Man. Let's make him a pacifist, or something like that. And you're like, does that fit? Well, I don't know. There aren't so many Wonder Man stories, or the absolute pinnacle Wonder Man story that you would look and go, no, Simon wouldn't do that. That doesn't fit.
Right.
And I feel like Clint's kind of in that way as well, where you've got a little bit more room to explore and a little bit more room to sort of try and find that footing for yourself and go, this is what the character feels like to me. And hopefully, the fans that love his stories are excited to see that kind of development as well. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of comic writers talk about the need to kind of put the characters back in the box, or basically when they complete their run, they need to set it up for the next person. And a little bit kind of listening to you and also listening to Joe, I think that's what Hawkeye often feels like, is that writers will come on and like, we need to do something that evolves a character.
Right.
But at the end, he's going to go back to this basic state. And
but what is his basic state though?
I don't think it's well defined, right?
Well, that's the thing, is that I feel like his basic state is he's an archer, but exactly. There's not even one team that you expect to see him on, or one place you expect him to live, or one, like, what is a Hawkeye villain? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the nice thing about it, is in that
trick
sense.
shot, I think.
But whatever, like whatever. Not a good
Hawkeye villain. I'm with you. But it's like we get these moments where you get Fractions run, and it gets a lot of attention, and it kind of defines his character. And then it's like, okay, there seems like this uncertainty. Like, okay, do we want to start to push toward, the other Hawkeye now, and maybe he's a mentor, but We also like him kind of as a loser, so let's have him back her up in West Coast Avengers. But no, hang on, we'll put him over here. And it's all. So I'm very much looking. I like of the pitch you've described. I like the callback to when he led the Thunderbolts. I think that's great. Good history. And I like this idea that we're going to define him a little bit we're actually going to put some
and I'm, one of the things I really like to do in my writing, because I'm a bit of a continuity dork, is I do like to take threads, old threads and new threads, and kind of weave them together and go, no, it's all still there. So like the Fraction stuff, all of it happened, right? And we can reference that and utilize it, but it also doesn't mean we have to trap the character in that moment. Same thing with Monica. Same thing with America Chavez, they just finished that America Chavez miniseries, Made in America, and they've given her a new origin and kind of a new state of being. And so I'm using some of the threads from that in this story. Monica's had a bunch of different stuff go on with her over the last few years. And it's like, okay, I'm going to utilize some of that in the story, but always trying to do what I felt like comics did really well when I was reading in the 80s, where wherever you dropped in, you had enough information that you could just pick up and go. Like, yes, if you want to go back and read those stories, you'll get more out of it. And yes, obviously we're using Devil's Reign as sort of the springboard for some of the stuff we're doing. But if you don't read Devil's Reign, you should, because it's great. But if you don't, you can just pick up issue 1 and it's like, oh, this happened. Oh, that's why this is this way. And therefore Clint gets this opportunity. Oh, cool. I get it now.
You mentioned,
it's simple. Yeah.
You mentioned these 2 other characters. So it strikes me that as we talk about the team, you've got 3 characters there: Hawkeye, Monica Rambeau, and America Chavez, who have had this, like you identified.
Yeah,
it's this undefined aspect to them, or this. It's been a lot of things. And Hawkeye, I think, has a really established fan base that's there.
Right.
That people,
particularly now after the Disney Plus show, I think that's much more. Yeah.
Monica Rambeau obviously was on Disney Plus, but there's a character almost a little different in that I feel like there's a lot of comic readers that just feel like that character has been screwed over the last 10 years or so. Like a really amazing
It's like
character.
The last time, she did some cool stuff in the Ultimates. She's always been a really good support player.
Yeah.
We used her in No Road Home, I feel like, pretty effectively. But like the last time it felt like she was out in front is probably Next Wave. And then a lot of that, her character was like a joke where she was constantly, I used to be the leader of the Avengers. And like there was this chip on her shoulder and kind of stuff like that. It was a really funny book. Like I loved it.
Was, yeah.
But
it underscored this. I think you have a group of the comic buying population that grew up and started reading during that Avengers run where she was the leader of the team. And they almost, they're like, that's my character, in a sense of like, I grew up with that character. Where's that character been?
Right.
And so that's an exciting option. And then you got American Chavez, which that's another one that, we talked with Joe Casey. He had the original kind of pitch. And then we had the Gabby Rivera series. And then we had the, just recently this mini series that kind of redefined her origin.
Yeah.
And then the Ultimates run, of course. And soon not Disney Plus, the Doctor Strange 2.
Yeah. She's showing up in there. Yeah.
And it looks like she's going to be a lot younger in that movie. Like it
does. Yeah. It's hard to know, how it's going to play out, and it's not something that I'm not getting notes in that way where someone's saying like, oh, you have to match whatever they're doing in the movie,
Yeah.
But it was something where we were looking at, and a lot of it was geography based. Just we wanted a New York based team in particular. And so we looked at this list of characters and she was in the mix. And I said, oh, I sounded weird. I was like, is she available? Because I just assumed there would be other stuff. And they were like, no, that works. And it's like, okay, cool. I would love to have her in the mix and then figure out how we can build those dynamics. Plus she was on the Ultimates with Monica, and stuff like that. Like, and she was out in the West Coast Avengers with Clint. So it's like, oh yeah, there's multiple connection points there. That's easy. That's easy to work with.
So you've got 3 characters that have been defined a lot of different ways over the last 10 years, and 3 characters that are being defined in a pretty major way on Disney Plus.
Yes.
Same 3 characters. And then you have 2, not completely blank slates. Obviously, persuasion and power, but pretty close to that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they haven't been utilized. Like Kara Kilgrave, she's the daughter of the Purple Man. You know, most people just know him as Kilgrave because of Jessica Jones and stuff like that. She was a character from the mid to late 80s who showed up in Alpha Flight, Bill Mantlo and all this kind of stuff. And then just long periods of nothing. And she's just popped up a handful of times since then. She actually shows up in Kelly Thompson's Jessica Jones, that digital first series that they did. But it's like really briefly, just as sort of like a support bit.
Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people are seeing those. I mean, the digital, not a lot of eyes have been on those. So.
Sure. I thought it was really good. I actually really enjoyed that story. Actually. I thought it was fun. And what is neat about it, though, is I don't want to reveal too much. The Thunderbolts team, this team is being built in a very structured way, in the sense that the defined roles for each of the characters are chosen for specific reasons. And they need, for lack of a better term, a psychic component. They need a mentalist of some sort. And so I was looking down the list, and it's like, you know, every telepath is a mutant, and like, that's not quite what I want for the book, and kind of looking back and forth. And then this was sort of a bit of a wild card choice where I thought, you know what, this kind of works in its own way. And then on top of that, the Purple Man is in the Devil's Reign event. Oh, there's our little tether. This all kind of hooks in pretty well. And so I looked in and realized she just had, like you said, real undefined and a bit of a blank slate, but we can have some fun with that. We can have fun with the ways that she kind of ends up in the mix. And not to reveal too much, but one of the things I like about her character is that because she literally has purple skin, she can't hide. Do you know what I mean? Who she is or what her background is, like that her father is this criminal, like he's known around the world and he's terrifying and terrible. And so one of the things that motivates her in my run on Thunderbolts is that if she can't hide who she is, then she might as well be a celebrity. Like she might as well get out in front of it and define what she's going to be. Do you know what I mean? That she is not her father, that she is not a bad person. You know, like if you can't, this idea that she can't hide it anymore, so she might as well get out in front of it and define what it's going to be. If you're going to be recognized everywhere, at least be recognized for being a good guy, you know? And that's kind of the way she looks at it. Yeah.
And then, you know, you got Power Man. Tell us, so I like the conflict that you're setting up here. And then Power Man, it's this not generation character, but just legacy character trying to establish.
He's actually been around for a little while. He's bounced around on a couple of teams. He was in Mighty Avengers,
with Al Ewing.
You know, and then they did that. Yeah, both runs of Mighty Avengers, he's in there. I used him briefly in Champions. You know, he's got this really interesting power where he's like, his energy is gathered from chi energy. So like kind of, it's really ill-defined. It's like this cultural energy. So there's one spot in Al Ewing's run where he finds out that if he's reading books and studying art and then he goes into a fight, he's more powerful than if he just woke up and went on his day, because he's like surrounding himself with energy, with good energy and education and culture and all these kinds of ideas. So I've got some fun ways we're going to play with that in the book. Luke Cage is involved in the big climax of Devil's Reign, and he's not, I don't want to spoil anything. He's not available to be on the team. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But he wants to have a footprint, or he wants to be involved. And so he's like, look, you can't have the original Power Man, but this is my, you know, why don't you take the kid, show him the ropes, and he needs somewhere to land, you know, let's use him. And so he's been sort of brought into the mix in that way. Yeah.
I like it.
Nice. Yeah. I was wondering too about the Gutsen Glory character, because when you say cyborg in Marvel, that could, there's so many different directions. Is this more of a Deathlock cyborg, like Deathstrike, a Cameron Hodge type? Like, is this a nanovirus? There could be so many things. So what kind of cyborg?
I am purposefully keeping him as mysterious as possible. Okay. Like, this was actually kind of a fun thing where we were sort of looking at, it's got a bit of this 90s nod on purpose. Like, we want this character to be, he's designed in that kind of way. Sean Izaakse, who's the artist on the series, I love working with him. We've worked together on a multitude of projects. He got it. As soon as I described this character, I'm like, he's the gritty, loner 90s character who's, armored up and got an array of weaponry that will change every mission. And he's a mysterious figure that we're going to slowly kind of peel back the onion, and people are going to have certain assumptions about him. And I want them to have those assumptions. And that's the whole point. And then we start to, show that there's more going on. And that's all I can sort of say right now. And that's kind of the fun of it. And even when Clint meets him, he sort of goes, okay, so what are you all about? And what he essentially finds out is it's all just secrets, mysteries, like you're not allowed to know. And he's like, what the hell? Like, that's kind of the joke, is those characters in the 90s where they were just, your first impression is, oh, they're just a cool name and a design. And that's all they are. And in many cases in the 90s, they kind of were. And we're kind of playing with that trope, and then we're going to sort of peel back the onion and have fun with it. So yeah, it's kind of by design. And some people are loving it, and other people are like, that looks so corny. And I'm like, whatever you feel, that is the correct response, because it's sort of on purpose. Like, if you think this is really hokey, he's just sort of like kind of, Cable by way of Deathlock. Yes, he is. And it's like, no, but like, what's the point? You're going to have to read and find out. Like, there's something fun about that,
Sure. Well, and that's another good callback to the Thunderbolts in a way, because there was this, I mean, in this other way, there's this mashup of character, that mystery. I mean, the Thunderbolts has had many iterations. You mentioned the one that you did. There was, of course, the Warren Ellis during the Dark Reign, or right before
the Osborne, Dark Avengers version and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the team has gone through a lot of iterations and a lot of visions of what they could be. There's the Thunderbolt Ross one that Daniel Way did, and some of the pushback that we got on this announcement, I think people's vision of it is just understandably the original version, right?
Yes.
The Masters of Evil in disguise, Kurt Busiek and Mark Bagley do this brilliant turn and this reveal. And you can never, you can't put the lightning back in the bottle on that one. That is an amazing one-time only payoff. It works incredibly well. It's a classic for a reason. And it has definitely templated people's expectations, in a good way, right? But on the other hand, I can't just do that again. And I can't redo that trick. And I can't just expect that people are going to fall into the same thing. You know what I mean? And so for me, my job is to go, okay, how can I do something fun and unexpected? And we do have some surprises in the book, but they're not going to be, this is Zemo's Masters of Evil. Like, that's been played and played brilliantly. And I love that launch of the book, but I can't be Kurt Busiek and Mark Bagley circa the mid 90s. Like, that's just not going to happen. Right.
Well, I mean, just being honest, and this isn't meant to be overly negative about the publisher. I can't imagine a publisher letting that happen again. Like I don't think they could restrain themselves.
I don't know. I think that it's easy for people to, I mean, you would definitely hype up these guys have got a secret kind of element of it. But it's also this kind of thing where you could say that about all kinds of books. It's true. Marvel is not the publisher they were 30 years ago.
No, of course.
Whether or not you think that's a positive or negative, right? Like, but that's true of everyone. You see filmmakers trying to recapture the momentum of 30 or 40 years ago and play off of nostalgia, and that can only get you so far. Do you know what I mean? Right. Like, at some point in time, and we're all kind of victims of it. We're all living in this culture that is refreshing and rebooting and trying to redefine or rewrite history, and make money off of it, and trying to play into our nostalgia and make money off of it. And it's like, yeah, clearly I want to write these characters that I grew up on and I love, but I think one of the mistakes that a lot of writers make is the minute they get put on a book, they try and drag characters back to an era that they read growing up. And I feel like that is a disservice to the characters, a disservice to all the people that have written the characters since then. And it doesn't do you any favors, because you're always going to, the best you can be is a bad photocopy of what was, right?
Well, and it's hard to recapture. It's not just drag the characters to a moment. You've got to drag the readers to where they were in that moment, which is impossible. I mean, there's
the reason why you loved it is because you discovered it. You know what I mean?
Right.
The X-Men is the hardest team to write at Marvel, because we all have our vision of the X-Men, and that was when we started reading. And that is the correct and true lineup of the characters, and everything else is wrong. right?
Well, absolutely. The point I was going with a little bit more on the why I think it's impossible to recreate that kind of original Thunderbolts. In addition to what you mentioned, is just it feels to me, and it's not just comics; it's Hollywood as well. That the idea of a surprise like that, the idea of like holding your cards and holding them all the way to the brink, is just people like blink. They get too nervous and they're like, no, we gotta. I mean, it's why you see major events get spoiled before they're done.
But it's funny that you mention that that Marvel's not a company that would do a surprise when whatever you like. I totally understand the contentious and the comments that are going to come flying up for this, but they let Nick Spencer's Hydra Cap come out in the issue. They launched that book, Captain America #1, and it's Steve Rogers Captain America, and it's like we got Jesus Saez and we've got Nick Spencer. They're launching this new formative run of Captain America, and the last page of that issue is a total body blow because no one saw it coming, right? And
here's the thing: I think it works. I mean, I know that was a very controversial move, and people were pissed about it, but it did set up some sales for him. It set up a number of things. It feels to me like surprises if you just hold your tongue and just let those, as you said, body blows happen.
Yeah, the weirdest thing for me was knowing that reveal was coming like 6 months in advance because I was writing Thunderbolts, and Nick wouldn't even write it in an email. Like we got on a call, and he told me what was happening in the story. And he goes, there are less than, like outside of editorial, there's less than like 5 people that know this right now, but you have to know because you're writing Bucky and you're writing this Thunderbolts arc that has got the Cosmic Cube and all this stuff in it. And he goes, this is what's going down. And if it gets out, I know it's you that leaked it. And I was just like, oh my God. And so, the day that issue was coming out, I knew like a week before, I was like, here we go. And you just don't know how the public's going to respond, right? Like it was a wild ride.
I'd like to think, and I may be wrong about this, but that, and that was definitely a controversial move and people are upset about it. I'd like to think that even if you don't always like the surprise, most comic readers, most people they want some surprises. I think they legitimately, even if they don't always like what it is, they like it.
It's funny you say that that the publisher would spoil it. I think the reality is, and Marvel's done this several times, like the Doc Ock, body switch for Superior Spider-Man. That was another one. They held it to their chest, and then retailers got angry that they weren't warned ahead of time. But it's like if they told the retailers would spill it.
Yep, and that's definitely a part of it. And I do think. I do have to chuckle a little bit at some of the Facebook groups or retailers like, I hate the way the company's always spoiling this stuff. It's like, it would be you. If it wasn't them, it would be you.
Yeah. You would gleefully announce and steal the thunder because that's, there's something potent about having a secret that you can, kind of throw the grenade over your shoulder and walk away. Yeah.
Well, I love those surprise. I wish there were more of them. To me, if I think back about the happiest moments in comics, even if I didn't like what ultimately rolled out about it, I love those genuine shocks.
I think that a bunch of those genuine shocks came from the fact that we weren't reading an ordering catalog months in advance. We were just showing up to the store to buy a book. And so if a character died, you didn't see online previews, you hadn't read interviews, and you just didn't have the kind of
it's a different world
media system that we have, right? There's this thing where people will talk about, things were so much better when I was 10 to 12 years old, and you're like, yes, things were simpler when you were 10 to 12 years old, but your parents. Politics were, difficult and the world was a crazy place. But yes, when you were 12, things were easier. Things were cleaner and simpler and purer and whatever you want to call it.
No, those were great days.
Of course.
I'm like that right now. All right. So Monica Rambeau is a character, I know at least on this channel, I would say a majority or a large number of people just love that character. So
she's amazing.
We're getting some good moments for her. You're going to give her some kind of moment to shine, right?
Yes. Okay. And, one of the things I love doing, so people have complimented me and they say that they like the way I do team dynamics, that I try and give everyone good moments, that I try and give them interactions that feel rich and interesting. And I try and create sparks, not just like romantic, but just like interactive, Not everyone has the same opinion. Not everyone is going forward, holding hands and we're this unified team. Like it's all about trying to figure each other out. And this team is that writ large because of some of the ways that they're pulled together and the reason why they're recruited. That's all I can say so far. And Monica is a big version of that, where she's brought into this for a very specific kind of reason and has to kind of deal with other people because of it. I try not to spoil stuff. She's a great character. I really love her as a character. I bought her first appearance back in the day. Amazing Spider-Man annual. She just shows up in that annual, and she's so awesome. And her abilities are so potent. And a lot of people, I think, don't know how to use her really well. Like, they worry that she's super overpowered. I did like a lot of the stuff that Al did with her in the Ultimates. He's always willing to kind of blow it out and do kind of cool, crazy stuff. And so I'm trying to live up to some of those things as well in a fun kind of way. She's great, and she is I don't think it's been given her due, like you said, in a little while. And so having a place where we can kind of flex, and it's hard because in any kind of ensemble book, and I've got 5 issues and only so many pages, and you're like trying to make sure everyone's plots are moving forward. And in that way, I feel like the book is dense in a good way. Like, you get your money's worth. We're not doing any kind of decompressed anything. Like, it's like a lot of stuff happening, a lot of character moments. Our first issue is 30 pages, by the way.
Okay,
I'm
that's
really
good.
Happy about. And that was very holistic. Like, I kind of did the outline, and here's how it's going to work, and here's all the stuff we need to cover. And they came back to me and said, I think you need, like, your opening issue needs a lot of space to fit that all in there. And I'm like, hey, if you give it to me, I'll take it, because I'm loving that. So 30 pages gives us that space to really introduce the team members, give everyone their new kind of setup, have a big, fun, crazy action scene where everyone gets to do cool stuff, and then set up a couple little dominoes where you're like, wait a minute. And then we just sort of go, oh, you got to see next issue, kind of stuff. Like, I'm trying to, everything I've kind of learned about superhero comics and writing and pacing, I'm super excited about it. Sean's one of the best damn artists I've ever worked with. And Thunderbolts #1 is one of the best superhero scripts I've written. So I sent it in, and normally I'm like, check it out. Let me know what you think and all this kind of stuff. And I send it in and I go, I think we hit the mark on this one, And Tom, again, he's an amazing editor, really, really great. Came back with essentially no notes. Like, it was just like, yep, like, you've delivered all the stuff that you said you wanted to do, and it works. So that's that worked for me.
Yeah, well done.
I'd love to also talk about, when you're approaching writing stuff, you talked about, this is going to be comedic elements here too.
Yeah.
When you're writing comedy, and I know you've written comedy in comics before, we just haven't really like talked about it specifically. Like,
it's always weird talking about humor, because everyone's let's overanalyze and suck all the life out of a joke by analyzing it, but it is valuable to do so, 100% for sure.
Absolutely. So when you're doing something like a superhero book, because I know, like, Skull Kickers, it's not like, that was your own thing. You kind of have that control, but like when you're doing something like this, and you're balancing, like, okay, I got your checklist. I'm like, I have to move the plot forward, and I want to make sure I give enough character screen time and all that stuff. Like, how do you approach humor in that? What's too much? What's too little? Like, dive into it a bit. Tell us how you approach that.
That's a good question, Joe. You put me on the spot in a good way. It is
he
that
asks
weird
the smart
thing.
questions. I make the dumb jokes.
No, it's nice though. It's like you're trying to figure out how to stay true to these characters, but put them in situations that are, first of all, the situations are funny by their nature, but it's not just like goofiness. Like, this is what's so weird about it. The characters, to me, always kind of have to stay true. Like, it can't just be, let's make them all clowns, because that doesn't work either. You know what I mean? So it's like misunderstandings or people with clearly different intent, but it's not the kind of conflict where it's going to be violent. So they're just start messing with each other. I think there's something very fun and true about that. You know what I mean? Like, people, I will purposefully ignore what you just said and do what I want to do anyways. And there's something very funny about that. You know what I mean? Or I'm going to purposely misconstrue what you just said because that gets me what I want. And then they have to backpedal, and, all the kind of verbal kind of jabs and sparring that you can do with the characters. Or sometimes the humor comes out in really subtle ways that the reader knows something that the characters don't in that moment. And there's something very fun and ironic about that. Or one character knows something, and if they would just tell everyone else, this would work, but they can't for these reasons. And the tension of that creates kind of a humor that bubbles in the background. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and then there's the simple kind of stuff, the slapstick stuff that I love to do. Like, not all humor has to be incredibly nuanced. Sometimes it's really simple. Like a character screws something up and it doesn't go the way they want, and there's a pratfall kind of element to it. Or a character using their powers in a way that is kind of creative but awkward, or creates a lot of pain or violence that you're like, oh, that's wrong. You can't do that kind of stuff. And we can do some of that off panel, and we can kind of, infer those kinds of things. And that's the stuff that it's kind of fun. And having these established characters, the good news is that someone like Tom, who knows the Marvel Universe inside and out, if I kind of bounce an idea or a joke in the script off of him, he'll tell me if I go too far, or he'll be like, that seems out of character. That's not what so-and-so would do, or whatever. Yeah. And then I can kind of reel it back in, but I'd rather go for it in the initial and then see if we can get there and find that kind of joyous moment or funny moment. And it's a weird balancing act, that's for sure. So for example, someone like Gutsen Glory, I'm playing him up to be this mysterious Cable-esque character who's all business and very military ops kind of, countenance. And so if I can put him in a situation where he's always the straight man, or very simple, focused, and everything around him is chaos or ludicrous, but he's completely focused on a target or the mission, there's something funny about that. There's something funny. There's a scene in issue 2 where there's an action scene happening, and there's a bunch of kids around, and kids are like climbing on top of him, and he's just like focused on firing his rifle. And you're like, there's literally like kids punching him in the side of the head, and he's like ignoring them so he can take a shot. And you're like, there's something ridiculous about that. You'd never do that with the Punisher, or whatever. But that's what's kind of fun, is he's not going to break character. He is got to do the job, or something like that. And you can find those little contrasty kind of moments that I think are really good. Again, without spoiling too much, one of the things I wanted to introduce into this is there's a couple supporting characters in the cast that are just regular people who are helping the Thunderbolts do some stuff. I love those kinds of characters. Like, back in the day, whether it's Betty Brant or, a Stevie Hunter in the X-Men, the dance instructor and stuff like that. Like, I love those characters who kind of reflected the real world and responding off of the superheroes. Yes. One of the things that makes me a little sad about modern superhero comics is a lot of times there's so many characters, the regular people don't get reflected anymore. They're just sort of sidelined because we have heroes interacting with heroes interacting with heroes. Like, what used to be really special in the 60s with Stan Lee is like, oh my gosh, the Human Torch showed up in a Spider-Man issue. What a surprising and odd thing. And now it's like, these heroes are tripping over each other, because it's like every city block there's 5 heroes perched on a edge of a building or something.
It's, by the way, that's such a good point. It's funny you say that, because I've heard a lot of interviews where people say, we need to appeal to people by making it a little bit more relatable. It's a slice of life genre and everything else.
Yeah.
And yet, in the 70s and the 80s, you had these supporting characters that were the slice of life. It was that
Absolutely.
thing. It was the character you could relate to. They're gone now.
I love those characters. Yeah, they're some of my favorites, because they can't support their own book. That's not why they're there. But they provide contrast, or they provide an anchoring kind of voice. And so there's one of those kind of characters in the mix. Good. And she's interacting with Hawkeye pretty regularly. And, he's got these aspirations and expectations, and they're all very reasonable things as a superhero that he's asking for. And then she's just like reality and goes, no, you can't do that for these reasons. And there's humor in that, because as a superhero, this totally makes sense. And yet, as she's like the reality bomb that keeps getting dropped on all of his expectations. Like, yep, that would be great, but we can't do that. So let's do this instead. And so there's sort of fun humor and problems.
I like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I love more supporting characters. Sorry.
Going to get a little controversial here.
What?
Despite the flaws I think we can all agree that, like, Chuck Austin's X-Men run is not the most well-regarded X-Men run ever written. I think we can.
Sure.
How dare
we're
you?
on there. But his attempt with a character like Nurse Annie, whether or not the character was completely successful or not, but having a character who was like that, who was a supporting character, who was more human, who was interacting with the X-Men regularly like that,
Right.
was already something that had fallen off. You didn't really see anymore. And it was nice to see a character like that. And
that's true. Yeah.
There used to be, like, now we don't even have Moira anymore because now, she's
the most important and powerful mutant,
Yeah, so it's like you took one of the cooler, like, supporting outside mutant characters and you dragged her in. So now it's like, it is interesting. It's like you lose that. Jarvis is like a robot voice and not like an Alfred character. Like,
right. There's in my Uncanny Avengers run, I had this lawyer show up. So because the Fantastic Four were gone, I had this interesting idea around, well, who owns all of the Fantastic Four stuff? Like, it's got to go to, the next of kin or whatever may have you. And so I was like, oh, that's got to be Johnny Storm. Well, he's currently on the Uncanny Avengers. And so I had this subplot where there's literally like an IP lawyer who's trying to track down Johnny Storm, but he doesn't answer his phone because he's Johnny Storm and he doesn't pay attention to stuff or whatever. And this lawyer has to physically show up, take a plane, fly in, take a car, show up at Avengers Mansion and go, hey, I've got paperwork for you to sign. I've got billions of dollars that I need to give you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Johnny's like, oh my God, right? Like, and that lawyer having this weird little funky subplot of who is this guy? What's he doing? That very much feels like a 70s kind of 80s sort of character, like this lawyer just trying to carry out his regular everyday job, but his regular everyday job happens to involve a superhero. And so there's an extraordinary quality to it. You know what I mean? And I like those kind of man on the street sort of things. I like those little contrasting bits. And you can mine them for humor. You can mine them for just to give people a point of view that goes, hey, there are still normal people. Someone's picking up the garbage. Someone is making food in this world. It's not all, Tony Stark technology and alien, invasions or whatever. Yeah.
Well, it rang true. I think those moments that you remember them because they were people that you've had in your life or that would go around. And I think that it is funny. In order, as people have said, they want more of an emphasis on those kinds of moments. It feels like they've gone away from them.
And I think there's all sorts of different ways to do it. Like in Champions, we had the school shooting issue, and there's a whole sequence where Miles is talking to a therapist. And I was like, I want this to feel very real. Like, what would, if you, had been in a school shooting or all this kind of stuff, what would someone say? How would this sort of stuff work? And so I did some research on that and talked to some people and tried to craft something that felt very grounded because we were dealing with a very serious subject. But at other times, you're playing up in the ridiculousness of it or the silliness of it. It's one of those things I would love in the 80s comics where they would have, even the Stan and Jack stuff they would do all the time. They'd have your regular person on the street reacting to whatever was going on around them, shaking their fist at whatever the superhero is. And, what is this? How does this affect you if there's a traffic jam caused by an alien invasion or stupid stuff like that? And because we're doing this New Yorker kind of thing, I'm playing up on some of those kind of fun cliches. And to be 100% honest with you, I have a really fun anecdote about this. I remember being in New York City for I think my second New York Comic-Con, and huge traffic jam. I'm stuck in a cab, and this truck starts to pull out, and basically another car gets, stuck in traffic and they can't move properly. And a cop gets up and just starts walking over and starts talking to them about what they should do. So-and-so's going to move the car or whatever. And then some random person rolled down their window and they go, don't talk about that stuff. You give them a ticket. You give them a ticket. And now the cop runs over to the other person and goes, you going to tell me how to do my job? It's like, well, your job is to write the ticket. The guy's blocking traffic. You got to, take him, haul him in. And so now the cop is arguing with the bystander who told him how to do his job. And I'm like, I'm loving this. I'm like, this is the purest New York moment I could ask for. It's like everyone's got that accent. Everyone's yelling at each other. Horns are honking and everyone's screaming. And I'm like, I just want to hold this moment in my heart. I'm having a blast because I feel like I get to be this bystander in this ridiculous comic book quality moment. And so one of the things I've been really enjoying about writing in this Thunderbolts book is literally having people on the street who are like giving Hawkeye advice or whatever, like telling him, oh yeah, so we heard you screwed up yesterday, you're going to do better today. And he's just like, what the hell, like stuff like that. Like I like that kind of,
well, that's a Ted Lasso connection there.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Well, when he would walk around and people call him a wanker or whatever, like I think there's something really fun about that. There's something joyous about your average person, they've got an opinion too. They're going to throw it in. Yeah.
Now we've gone this far, and I haven't asked one question I know also is on people's minds. It's not a joke, but villains. Like, do we get some villains in this?
Yes.
Thank God.
We have not revealed any of the villain stuff yet, and that's for multiple reasons. There's sort of, what can I say? How do I say it? There's two levels. Will be some.
That's going to make a lot of people happy.
Absolutely. There's two levels of sort of villain plots going on. There's a very surface level. We got to stop these immediate problems. And then there's a bubbling bigger thing under the surface that we're going to build up to in the 5th issue kind of payoff.
Okay.
And so the nice thing is that we tease the one where you're like, oh, this is really simple. And then we're going to sort of go, one of those things I really loved from classic kind of 80s comics is your A plot, B plot, where you're like, yeah, there's the immediate problem. We'll deal with this. But then under the surface, something is manipulating and something is building, problem and that kind of stuff. I'm pretty damn happy that I got the villain that I wanted for this story. That was my one worry when I sent the pitch in, was like, are they going to let me do fill in the blank? And it came back and they were like, oh, that would be fun. And it's like, whew, okay, this works now. Without it, it kind of doesn't, because the way it ties in with some of the character stuff. And I feel like the emotional stuff that we're going to be putting into place. So yeah, if you guys love the Thunderbolts, the happy news is that it is the story that I kind of wanted to write. Maybe not the exact ingredients, but like a lot of elements that I love about these superhero books and these worlds and these kinds of characters. And if you hate it, then it's like, yep, that's the purest distillation of kind of Jim's superhero team ethos. He's really bad at this stuff. Oh my God, But I mean, that wasn't an editorial mistake. That was all me.
I just all the blame can go onto you. Yeah. Perfect.
You're like when the reviews come in for issue 5 and they go, really? That's it? Huh. I guess that kid doesn't have that much in the tank.
Well, I'm gonna love I'm gonna love a story with a villain for a change. To be honest, thank God you got a villain. I think
it's not just superheroes beating each other up or something like that.
Oh, thank goodness! You're having a really uncomfortable lunch. It's just awkward. 5 issues. I think.
Well, I can tell you the villains of the first issue.
Okay.
So Wilson Fisk has this team of Thunderbolts, and they're all blatant criminals who've been deputized. And Hawkeye's first goal is, we're going to take those guys down.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah,
that's some pretty.
So the first issue is literally
in that.
Thunderbolts versus Thunderbolts. That's the very first issue.
All right, 30 pages right out the gate. Get a little bit more to go with. Okay, 5 issues, and hopefully the route. Now, here's a question: if the reaction is good, if the sales are strong, if you're seeing good things. How quick, it's in a lot of people's minds, how much time
do I get to find out in advance?
Well, no, I guess I'm asking a question that I know you don't fully have the answer to, but if
you're just setting me up to tell you I don't know.
No, but like in your experience, if something goes well like this as a limited series and Marvel decides, you know what, let's keep this going.
Right.
What kind of lead time, what kind of gap is there?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm trying to get ahead on writing, I've got a little bit more aggressive writing schedule on this than I normally would. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why is to hopefully bolster editorial's vision, like this is what I'm doing and it works, you know what I mean? But also look at all the potential here. There are a couple threads I want to set up and I don't want them to be in there if we're not going to get an extension. So I can just sort of de-emphasize those, or I can fade those, not have them in there. And some of them are as simple as a bit of dialogue or take one panel out kind of stuff. But I would love to include them because I think that this helps, frame where we're going to go and how we can make this, really keep the momentum going. And then a bunch of these characters, this is a really, how do I put this, almost mercenary way of looking at it. Look, you don't currently have a home for Hawkeye, America Chavez, Spectrum, and all this kind of stuff. And those are characters that are going to have a visibility boost have had one in terms of Hawkeye, but these other characters are going to be in the public, eye more in the coming months and years. Why not? Maybe individually, sense. Like, I don't know, can Monica Rambeau hold down a solo series? Maybe a mini series, but probably not an ongoing, if we're being 100% honest. Right?
No,
but as part of
the current state, right, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And that's nothing against the character. That's just like, kind of cold commerce, right? But if you take these characters collectively and you make the stories really fun and you bring in, a bigger audience on it, maybe collectively they can hold down a nice solid run on a team book and people will want to read their ongoing adventures. Like that seems much more doable and viable to me. Obviously, I'm the one writing it. I've got a vested interest in that being the case. But even to a retailer or to a reader or, that feels like a better sell in that sense.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the reality is, and as much as it will pain some people listening to this to hear it, Hawkeye can't hold down a solo book right now.
Right.
In its current state. And they've tried. God knows they've tried.
Yeah.
So, but the only way to get there is not to wake up one morning and suddenly it's like, all right, the day is right. Now we can do our Hawkeye ongoing. The only way to do it is to boost up these characters in this way. And so
and you have to try stuff. You have to push, different combinations and different creative teams until you find those kind of magical little, elements that all come together. The right artist, the right writer, it all kind of works. And then people go, oh, that's the vision of the character that we've been really waiting for, right? Like you would have said, Vision as a character can't hold down a solo book. And then, Tom King puts together this really fascinating, introspective kind of thing. Now, I'm not claiming we're going to do some deep character dive on that level, but there was something magical about that run, that really made it work. And from what I heard from Tom,
series, so
but it wasn't though. Tom was going to make it ongoing, and the only reason why they cut it short was because he went over to Batman. Yeah.
So you're right.
So it's really a thing where I'm not trying to put myself in that category and say, and clearly we're going to be that. But it's like, I'm sure as hell going to try. I'm going to come out as strong as I can. Yeah. There's no point in there are stories that are limited series, and you definitely go in with like, this is a self-contained beginning, middle, and end. And this book I'm doing has a beginning, middle, and end thematic. Like, yes, we are trying to redeem the name of the Thunderbolts, and it, I don't want to say it works or it doesn't, but it's like there is some sort of a conclusion in terms of what that becomes. And then we set up a bunch of these other little plot bits, and hopefully you get to carry that forward. And sometimes, the powers that be decide that is going to be issue number 6, or sometimes they decide that's going to be a new issue number 1, or you rebrand it with a different name. Who knows, right? Like, and that stuff's in some cases out of your hands. And in other cases, you can sort of steer, right? Like when I was doing Champions, my Champions run started, my first issue was solicited, and I think a week later, CB took over as editor-in-chief. And then he decides, we're going to do this fresh start thing with a bunch of new number 1s. Well, I wish I was on the other side of that line, because then I would have had a number 1. Instead, I did, I think, 7 or 8 issues, and then we did a number 1. And so I've got a new number 1 issue in the middle of my run, and it's like a weird pacing kind of push and change. But you're like, that was the market at the time, and that was the way the chips fell. and you make the best of it, and that's what you do. Yeah.
Fortunately, everybody who read that was not confused at all with a number one right in the middle of a run. It was all fine. It was great.
Yeah. But, again, you can, when you look at these things in terms of decision making, right? In terms of marketing,
of course.
And it's, there's so many different factors at play. It's not just as simple as saying, damn the torpedoes, we will keep legacy numbering, and that's all there is to it. Because
it's complicated.
And the frustrating part is, if people didn't keep buying number ones, they wouldn't keep, hitting the button, right?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, I get a lot of people, and they certainly annoy me, and I know they annoy a lot of people who comment, the amount of variants and all the rest of that stuff. It's like,
if it didn't sell, they wouldn't do it.
Yeah,
and that doesn't, therefore, that isn't meant to be as an excuse. Then therefore they should, there is no limit. Right. But on the other side of it, you also have to look and go, well, some of this, some of this stuff happens. One of the things I was thankful about is, and this was not even something that I pushed for, but I'm pretty sure, if I wasn't mistaken, in the Devil's Reign branding, they were going to have that book be called Thunderbolts, the one with Wilson Fisk's crew. And then someone looked at it from marketing and goes, we can't have 3 issues of Thunderbolts and then launch another Thunderbolts book. So we'll call this one Villains for Hire, and then that'll feed into Thunderbolts. And
that's good to hear.
Yeah, and so it was sort of like, okay, we're not going to get complete. We're not going to wear out that name instantly across the event. So.
All right. So if we're recapping here, we got some long characters long overdue for some definition redemption.
Sure,
you're dealing there. You got villains.
Dun dun dun.
I know that's 5 issues, but not completely closed. There's a possibility for it to go more, and you're going to tee it up. Hopefully that reaction is good. I don't know. And the artist, you got an amazing artist.
Sean Izaakse is one of my favorite artists to work with. We actually met back in the day on a Dynamite book we were doing called Pathfinder, this fantasy series. He's an amazing, amazing artist. I ended up bringing him in to Marvel to do 2 of the fill-in issues on my previous run on Thunderbolts. And they're 2 of my favorite issues, both in terms of the story and in terms of his art on it. They really, really came together well. We loved working together. We worked together on Champions. He did some of Avengers No Surrender. He was one of the primary artists on Avengers No Road Home. When he started doing Fantastic Four with Dan Slott, I was like, oh, I'll never work with him again. Like he's now off at this, whole other level. And but we'd always stayed in touch, and we're really good friends. And I was like, man, he would be sort of my dream artist on another team book, because he was so good when we did Uncanny Avengers together and stuff like that. And Champions, he was just such a good artist, so thoughtful. And the timing was perfect. He wrapped up his run on Life Story Fantastic Four. And he actually tweeted, he was like, oh man, I'm coming to the end of this. And I was like, oh, we're casting for Thunderbolts. And so I actually reached out to, Tom, my editor, and I was like, I would love to have Sean in the mix. And he goes, man, he just finished Life Story, and that's a really hard book with a lot of moving parts. I don't know if he's going to want to jump into another team book immediately. And I know that Sean's a really big Hawkeye fan. Like, Hawkeye is genuinely one of his favorite characters at Marvel. And so I kind of stacked the deck, and I just called him up and I said, want to draw some Hawkeye? I got Hawkeye and all these other cool characters. And he was just like, okay. And he just kind of, have another coffee and get right to it. So he just dove right in. Yeah. Yeah. And he's crushing it.
This could open up a whole other hour of conversation, but just, I'd want to keep it forever, but
no worries.
I've heard this comment that, like, you never give characters people really love to them,
right?
Because they won't do it right.
Oh, with artists, you should always give them characters they love. Yeah. With artists, I think writers, there's that talk of don't give them the character they love because they're going to get too precious about it. I think I don't know that I've salted the earth or anything, but I probably talked about wanting Doctor Strange too much, because it's like, oh, Jim's the magic fantasy guy. We can't give him the magic guy. He's just going to do the same old. But yeah, I think when it comes to artists, you got to give them, the characters they love to draw, they're going to lavish attention and joy into. Yeah, give it to them. Give it to them every time.
And that's also absurd, by the way. Like, you have a background of magic and all these other elements.
Supernatural, magic and supernatural. I've pitched a bevy of supernatural books at Marvel, but usually unbidden. Like, it's not something where they've asked me to pitch. So I've tried to explain this to other freelancers and to people at large. There's two types of projects. There are projects where an editor is casting and they contact you and they go, we think you'd be a good fit for fill in the blank. Can you come up with a pitch? And that is the majority of stuff that you're going to get. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then very rarely you're able to go, do you know what you should publish? And you kind of push one upstream and try and make it happen. And those books are really hard to pitch because it's not part of a publishing plan or an initiative. You're essentially trying to redirect a flow and go, this is what you should be doing with so-and-so. You know what I mean? And I've tried to do that over the years. Sometimes it's useful to do, not even because you're going to get that book, but because you remind them that you have good story ideas. And they go, oh yeah, you know, we've already got plans for fill in the blank, for Power Pack, or like whatever you're pitching, you know, like the Great Lakes Avengers would be wonderful, Jim, but you know what you'd be really good on, or whatever. Not that I've pitched Great Lakes.
I can't imagine that's been said before.
No, but you know, but whatever that is, but sometimes they'll just go, but we have this one on deck. Why don't you come back with a pitch for that? And so that's kind of one of those interesting sort of things. But yeah, I've pitched a lot of supernatural stuff over the years. I don't even want to tell you all the characters because I don't want to jinx any of it. But like, I have jockeyed for just about every magic or supernatural character you can imagine, because I love them, because they were some of the coolest characters for me growing up. Yeah. And I've thought about them extensively, and it's like, oh, this is what I would do if I had my druthers, you know? So.
Well, and it's not like Marvel has any supernatural big things going on right now.
but that doesn't, you know, but on the other hand, I don't assume that I can, you know, come out the lead of the pack in every one of those choices. And a lot of times when they tell you we have plans for so-and-so, they really do, right? But again, it's one of those things where sometimes you need to sort of seed it early, where you go, I love these types of characters. You know, I really want to write more character of this kind of stuff. And then eventually, like for years, I told them, hey, let's do something with the Black Knight. I love fantasy stuff, you know, all that kind of thing. I do the Dungeons and Dragons book. I get really well known for fantasy. And then all of a sudden the opportunity comes to write Conan the Barbarian. So I would never have pitched Conan at Marvel before he was back at Marvel. But all of a sudden, when the character returned there, now I'm in the running. So, you know, it does come around. You know, I try and be very realistic about it. You can't always assume that you're at the top of mind for every single book or every single concept. You know, you also need to spread out these projects to a variety of freelancers. These are the things I tell myself when I'm bitter about it. And this happens with everyone, by the way. You'll notice
of course.
Yeah, like as soon as a book gets announced, every freelancer that had an idea for those, everyone that had a Hawkeye pitch, you know, they're staring daggers through the Twitter, you know, at me, whether they say, most of them don't say anything, obviously, but there's that sense of like, oh, really? Oh, Clint shouldn't be doing that. He should be doing my, you know, story idea, my pitch, my thing. Oh, and you know, that's the nature of the way this stuff works. Like, more power to like Zach Thompson did that Khazar book, right? Like the Lord of the Savage book came out, and that came right out of Empire Avengers. Like I gave Khazar this new supernatural connection to the Savage Land. I had a pitch for a story to follow up on that, and then it was like, we're doing a Khazar book, and he's connected to the Savage Land, and I was like, oh, well, never mind. Okay, cool, man. It was a really cool book. The team did a great job with it. They totally didn't go in any kind of direction I would have gone, but that's kind of not the point. Like sometimes you get to hold the baton and sometimes you got to pass it along. Right. And
you got to have a sense of humor about this, I imagine.
You do. You can't get too wound up in it or you'll drive yourself crazy. Right.
Yeah. So, no, I think everything wink to all the people listening. A good sense of humor would go a long ways for
it does. I know there's a writer, I can't name, there was a writer who was at Marvel. Sometimes you are brought into the mix and communicated about bigger plans, and sometimes you're not. That's just the simple truth of it, right? Sometimes you know what is leading to the next thing, and sometimes you don't. And that happens at all levels, okay? That's not just like people on an exclusive or stuff like that. Sometimes I will find out that someone is writing at Marvel because my editor does a group email, and all of a sudden I see someone's email address in the mix I haven't seen before. And I go, oh, I guess so-and-so just got a Marvel gig. You know what I mean? And then you find out what it's on or whatever. But in a greater way, I know a writer who was writing a book with a character in it. That book was coming to an end, and they really wanted to do more with that character. And then book got pitched. That character was in that book, and they didn't know about it until the solicit came out. And they sent a very snarky email that was like, oh, would have been nice to know. And the editor essentially emailed back and says, I don't have to tell you shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like you did a good job on the book. We're happy, but you don't own that character. You don't control what's going on, you know? And they ended up getting into a little bit of an argument over it. And that person kind of salted the earth in that office because they thought they deserved, like they were the shepherd of that character for the foreseeable future or something. And it's like, that's not the way this works, guys. You know?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's work for hire. I mean, these are characters we grew up with, we love, and everything else, but it's still work for hire.
And you can understandably be miffed and frustrated at times. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, sure. Obviously, if you want to continue to write certain characters and then you see it handed off to other creative teams, it can be frustrating. Or, you know, Gail Simone gave me a really good piece of advice. And she said, if you finish up a run, don't keep reading that book. And I was like, don't keep reading that book. And she's like, because it'll never be what you want it to be. And you'll just see all the differences and it'll make you, you know, upset. And sometimes I follow that advice and other times I haven't. And it's like, yeah, you know, and you can't really win the duality of it. If the book is not what you would have done and you don't like it, you're like, well, this sucks. They should have hired me. And if the book's amazing, you're like, no. You know, why is it so good now? You know what I mean? Like, I can give you an example, and this isn't a specific one. So I wrote, you know, Conan's Serpent War, and that was like a bunch of these Robert E. Howard characters crossed over with Moon Knight, and Set's the big villain and all this stuff. And we teed up some of the power dynamic stuff that Jason Aaron was going to do with Moon Knight in the Avengers. But I knew there were these sort of plans and talk of, oh, there's going to be a Moon Knight solo series. It's like, oh, I really want to write that Moon Knight solo series. And so I started poking around, and I didn't even put together a full pitch, but it was like, I mean, I just wrote Moon Knight and Serpent War. Like, I got to be in the running here. And I kind of, oh, yeah, I'd love to do Moon Knight. Moon Knight would be really cool. And it got shut down pretty early. Like, no, we're, you know, it's not open for a pitch. Like, don't put something together. Don't put your mental energy into it.
It's nice that you were told that, frankly.
Yeah, which is nice, right? And then Jed MacKay gets announced on it. And Jed's, I think, is an amazing writer. I love Daughters of the Dragon. I thought it was really great. I really love the Black Cat book. But, you know, he gets announced on Moon Knight, and I'm like, oh, man.
Hey, jerk face. Yeah.
Well, it's like, I love Jed. He's a great dude, but, oh, geez, I would have loved to do that. And then I read the first couple issues, and I went, no, it's amazing. The book is phenomenal. I'm thoroughly enjoying every issue. It's not at all what I would have done, but, man, it's absolutely killer. And in some ways, it helped me to kind of detach from, Jed was absolutely the right guy for the job. He's crushing it. The book is incredible. Like, what a great opportunity. And he knocks it out of the park. Yeah, like, that's what you hope to see, you know?
You call off the hit and then...
right? Well, you know, every so often you get this awkward thing where I would go to a convention and you're writing... So, a particular character. When I wrote Thunderbolts the last time, I had a bevy of people, freelancers, come by my table, and they would tell me, oh, yeah, so you're writing Winter Soldier, eh? And I was just like, what? What's wrong? And they go, oh, yeah, I had a Winter Soldier idea, or I pitched Winter Soldier, or I, you know, whatever. And you're just like, oh, yeah. I didn't know that. I'm not trying to make an enemy here. Like, that's not kind of the way this stuff works. Like, yes, for the time being, I'm writing Bucky Barnes, but, like, I'll let it go. Don't worry. It'll be okay. I won't break it or whatever, you know. So I think some people, they just get so, they think of their careers also as this, like, in this moment, if they don't get this gig, all is ruined or whatever. Yeah. And what you realize the longer you're around is you're like, no, stuff comes around. You know, you maybe you get another shot at something, maybe you don't. But if you keep at it and you keep building the kinds of books and stories that you love, then ideally companies will offer you the kinds of projects that would be a good fit, you know? Yeah. Perfect example. I can't talk about the specifics, although I would love to later in the year. Okay. I've got a book launching. It looks like in the fall at Marvel. It is an 18-year-old pitch.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is an 18-year-old pitch. So this is before I've done almost anything published. A good friend of mine, he was just starting to get some Big Two credits. And I really wanted to do comic writing at the time. He pitched an idea to we pitched an idea to Joe Q as part of a Max pitch for Marvel Max.
Okay, that dates it a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And the response was, yeah, this is interesting, but who the hell are you guys? Because who the hell were we, right? We were only able to pitch it because of other contacts that we had. And we got no traction whatsoever. And I was like, it was a really cool idea. And then years later, I was finally starting to do stuff at Marvel, and the idea kind of bubbled up again. And I thought, this would be really cool. And right as I was thinking of refurbishing the pitch, a book got announced that had a very similar element to it. And I was like, never mind. It's cursed. It'll never happen. Lo and behold, things come around. And sort of late last year, I looked and I said, you know what? This is like coming back around. I can see that this kind of concept would really work again. And so I just sent a real random email over to CB. And I said, would this kind of thing work? And CB responded quite quickly. And he goes, I don't know, but you should talk to this editor. And I hadn't done any work with that editor. And I thought, they're not going to respond. I'm trying to pitch one upstream. It's impossible. They instantly responded. They wanted to see the pitch. I had to contact my buddy and basically said, hey, I'm going to send this thing in. And he just starts laughing. He's like, well, it's not going to make it. I'm like, what's the harm? It's, blow the digital dust off. Let's send it in. Yeah. And so we did a quick pass on it because God, hope I'm a better writer now than I was back then. Touched it all up, sent it over, and we got the green light on it. So this crazy old project is Frankenstein monster, from the dead, and is coming out this fall. And I'm super, super excited about it. And it's one of those things that you never know. You just never know. Sometimes it all comes back around. And
you just revealed it. So you're doing Frankenstein for Marvel.
Incredible, right? Okay. Yeah. Incredible. We're going to do this extensive history of Frankenstein at Marvel, all of his incredible. No, man, it's great. It's super fun to be able to take those old kind of concepts. And there's this sort of joke like nothing is ever kind of dead. It's one of the reasons why I never talk about failed pitches, and I don't talk about the books that would have never been. Like, that's a real common thing. People will message you and they'll say, well, what would have happened if you'd have done Champions, 20 more issues or something? And a lot of writers, because they're all built up and they're excited, they want to do that. They want to go, well, I would have done this and I would have done that and I would have done that. And a lot of that stuff's really good stuff. And it's like, maybe you don't get to do it in Champions. Maybe you don't even get to do it with those characters. But you know what? Some of those plot points, some of those concepts, some of those revelations, that's totally valuable material.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, things do come around. They reboot the title 3 or 4 more times and your chime comes up.
Whether it's that character or not, sometimes you just take an old mission. So Gutsen Glory, the name of that character, was a villain name that I had on a pitch that I did at a completely different project. And it was like, I'm going to make this character called Gutsen Glory because I think it's a funny name. And it's like, nope, doesn't happen. Okay. And then I come back around and I'm coming up with these characters and I want to have this kind of 90s throwback soldier and I'm brainstorming names and I go, oh yeah, that name, that would have been fun. Let's use that. That's just one example, right?
I think you're smart to keep it to yourself. I mean, or open up a Substack and spill all the beans there. One of those two.
Yeah, I just think it's better not to do that stuff.
I think you're right. Yeah.
There's a couple so my Thunderbolts last time was Bucky Barnes and the original Thunderbolts going on these kinds of missions. Mm-hmm. And they were really weird ad hoc kind of missions. And I brainstormed, I think, a dozen really strange ones. And some of them pulled on some very old Marvel continuity threads. And one of those missions I ended up refurbishing and using for Black Panther and the Agents of Wakanda. So it's like, yeah, that mission totally still works, and that those little ingredients are still fun. You never know where you're going to use some of this stuff.
I think that's good advice. Hopefully people take it. Well, look, Jim, I'm very excited about your series.
Thanks,
Legitimately very excited about your series. People always accuse me. It's like, well, you have somebody on, you fluff them. But no, I like these characters. I legitimately like these characters. I also feel a deep desire that somebody does something with these characters. Like
sure.
So I'm excited to see that. The only disappointment, honestly, in what you mentioned is I would just love Marvel to bite the bullet and do the ongoing series from the get-go and stop with some of the series. But I get it's that business.
Totally. It's one of those things where, again, I just feel like, I just want to come out of the gate as strong as possible and prove that this concept's got legs and we can really run with it. But I also need to go in with the sense of like, look, we're telling a complete story here. This is going to be fun. And convince you that it's a ride well worth taking. And that should be our job every time, right? So.
Now, next time you do one of these, the next kind of limited series you did, I suggest you do it David Lynch style, and you just end it right in the middle of a plot point.
So I'll tell you,
readers. That's
when I ended Thunderbolts in 2017 at issue 12, right before Secret Empire.
Right.
There's a cliffhanger ending on that book, and so like Mach 10 is like dead and buried in the collapsed base of the Thunderbolts, and Songbird is in the Arctic, basically wandering around screaming his name, not sure if she's ever going to get home. And in theory, like that was where we left Mach 10 and Songbird. And they've never ever followed up on that, and you're just like, awkward. Okay, and I did that very much. I loaded the gun like, well, they got to let me fire it. Like I got to do the next book, and then no such luck. So I got to be careful about leaving those extra brutal cliffhangers because
more of those. Just
haunt you.
Right in the middle. Why not? Well, I hope. So congratulations on the book. I hope people will check it out. I think it's exciting, and also thanks for coming on and talking with us again. It's always great talking.
Pleasure. And we had a great talk even before we started the interview stuff. Just sort of catching up and.
Oh no, breaking kayfabe here.
No, I know. It's good. I love that. I love being able to touch base with people, and because I haven't been to a convention in ages, I think there's that need, that social desire. Plus, if I talk with you guys all about comic book stuff, then my wife is saved from me yammering about it, at the dinner table endlessly.
My wife feels the same way. We got to talk about normal people stuff now.
You're like, oh my gosh, yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I love watching some of the videos and the stuff that you guys do, even when I vehemently disagree with what you guys say, or I think that you're coming at it from an angle that isn't the way I would look at it. I kind of look and I go, you know what? This is interesting discussion. This is valid. And it's cool to sort of know that there's this these topics are flying all around and people are throwing down.
Yeah.
It's good.
Well, tell us how you really feel about Gumroad then. You're a big fan?
I don't have a Gumroad account. I think, it's so interesting because it's like very much generational. It feels like the webcomics creators that came after me, it was a much more valuable kind of tool for them or whatever.
Yeah.
I took forever though to get a Patreon. Like I'm always a late adopter. I'm not going to go out and go, oh, here's the hot new technology. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to go like, let's see how the field clears. Really? Zune? Really? You think that's going to be the new thing or whatever? I'll wait and see what lasts, and then I'll kind of come in a little.
Well, then when are you announcing your NFT project?
Aha. Yeah. Oh man, the number of I've been approached by a lot of companies about NFT stuff. Everything from fantasy stuff to superhero stuff, asking me to be on the ground floor of whatever incredible, innovative, yada, yada, yada. The nice thing, and I've said this multiple times, the nice thing about my writing career is that I still have my teaching. I'm a tenured professor at a college here in Toronto. I love teaching. I love interacting with the students. And it means that I don't have to make project choices based on what's going to pay my mortgage.
Yeah,
so
that's nice.
I can, it's very easy to be moral when you have financial options. Do you know what I mean?
No, it's a lot of people do not have those benefits. And we ought to remember that when we're kicking them.
Yeah, a lot of times you see people will take a freelance gig and I look and I go, why did they take that? And the simplest answer is almost always because they needed to. And you're like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And so I look at a lot of the NFT stuff, and I can have a nice high road moralistic stance on it and go, nah, it's not really for me, because it doesn't affect me on a day-to-day basis,
Right.
And that's just the simple truth of this stuff. But I understand. I wish it was as simple as just saying, oh, this is the solution that will pay people what they're due for their art and their creations. But I don't think we're ever going to see those simple silver bullet solutions, because the corporate whatever is going to get involved. Yeah.
Well, next time we have you on, we definitely want to talk about the Canadian political system, media and TV, NFTs, Kickstarter, and tracing, I think, and piracy. We'll throw that in. Whether
people should wear masks or not, all that stuff.
Please.
All my favorite.
How do you feel about the fourth shot?
Boy, all my favorite topics.
That's what it needs to be. Look, I want to end this full circle. So I mentioned you reached out, you had this book, and thank you for doing that. But I was just thrilled to see you, and that was how I got the news, because I was working hard, and the first thing I saw was you. And then I said this somewhere else. I quickly had to go do something, and so I didn't see the second half of what you wrote. And in that time, somebody sends me a mail, and I see the little preview come in on my phone, and it says, "Hey, have you seen this Thunderbolts thing with the gay pink cover? Can you believe they're doing this?"
Oh, come on.
And
First of all, David Nakayama is an amazing artist.
It's a great
that
cover.
Cover looks great. It pops.
We talked about it on Friday, that you could change any other color gradient and the characters would have blended into the background. That was the right color choice. But anyway, so I'm seeing this. I look at I'm like, what are you talking about? I look at the cover. I'm like, no, it's a good looking cover. And then I go back to your original message, and you're like, hey, I just saw the pink cover. Somebody will complain about that. It's like, they already have. They already have. Well done. Good.
That is true. I didn't know that as soon as I saw that, I'm like, I think the cover looks great. And they're like, yeah, someone's going to complain about that.
No, it looks great. And
I think the book
this is going to be a fun comic. So looking forward to it. Jim, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day. And Joe, thank you for joining us today as well.
Absolutely. That was great.
Thanks, Joe, for bringing the nice, intelligent, pointed, solid questions about the craft.
That's why
properly against Perch's
nonsense.
lovable shit.
Yeah.